Well, hey, everybody, welcome to another discussion about principles that guide or should guide our financial and our spiritual lives. I'm joined by my friend today, Todd McMichen from Generosity by Lifeway. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation because it's one of my favorite topics, one that I'm challenged in all the time, and one I definitely want to grow in. And that's the topic of generosity. So let's just start off with first of all, generosity, giving is not just about giving money, right, Todd? I mean, I think a lot of times when we talk about giving, especially in church circles, in Christianity, we think, well, that's about giving money. And yes,
Right.
it's some of that, but giving is so much more than that. And I remember my pastor years ago said that in order to understand giving, you have to understand that giving is part of everything that you do, right?
Right.
If I want a healthy marriage, I have to be able to give, give in, give to my wife and serve my wife and take care of her. And that requires me giving. It's not about
Right.
me only, it's about her as well. So everything that we do is central. Giving is central to everything that we do. But we'll talk about more about other things that it includes. But I think I just wanted to set that as a foundation. Giving is just what we are all supposed to do.
Yeah. So, it's funny when we do get into our church life, we forget how we normally talk about generosity in our normal lives, right? So
Yeah.
in our normal lives, if you find someone who's generous, they're really generous with everything,
Yeah.
right? They're just not only generous with their money, they're just generous human beings,
Right. Right.
right? But when we come to church, we do tend to silo that just a little bit
Mhm.
and only think about money.
Yeah.
And and that's a real relief, because if we'll practice all the forms of generosity, it makes it easier because they're all connected.
Mhm.
You know
Mhm.
what I mean? So if I
Yeah.
find myself just, I'm going to learn to be a little bit more patient with my wife, it makes me a better listener actually when I'm in the neighborhood or at work. So all those forms, there's a domino effect to all these
Mhm.
different forms of generosity that are out there.
Yeah. I love what you just said because it's such a revealer of whether we are generous or how well we're doing in that area. Because generosity really reveals what we value, right? I mean, I'm going to give to the things that I care about. I'm going to focus and spend time and resources and energy and wealth and all that on the things that I care about. So, to a degree, the way I give always lets me know what I care about and what I value.
Hmm.
And if I say, well, I value this, I value that, but I don't ever spend any time or I don't give to that, then it's not really true, is it? So I think it's a great way to assess how generous are we. And you were talking about people who are generous, they're generous in every way. And I've certainly encountered people like that. Um, I always thought, like when you do those spiritual gift tests,
Hmm.
I would always answer the question because giving was something that I did and I understood. I even teach on it or I have taught on it. And I would always answer the question in a way that always made me look like I had the gift of generosity, because
Hmm.
after a while you can answer those tests in a way that skews
Right.
the actual results. And then later on, I was challenged personally through a quiet time that I actually don't have the spiritual gift of giving, and I thought I did. I really honestly
Right.
thought I did for years, and then I realized, but I don't wake up every morning wanting to give. Like I'd
Right.
rather just put it in the bank, right? I
Right.
feel more secure when I have more in the bank than when I give it
Right.
away. But yet there are those people who just give financially in every other way. So I think that's such a great point that generous people are generous in every aspect of life.
Well, and sometimes giving money is the easiest way to give, right?
Mm,
Because I mean,
yes.
there's harder ways of generosity. Like
Yeah.
if I have to schedule time to go help you do something that I really don't want to do for an entire day, and it's hot and sweaty outside, like, can I just buy you a mover instead of helping you move? You
There
know
you
what
go.
I'm saying?
Yeah.
So like sometimes
So true.
giving money is kind of easy.
Hmm.
It's an easier route,
Yeah.
for us.
Yeah. That's so
So
true. So true.
it's just opening our eyes to all the different ways generosity works
Hmm.
is helpful. It's helpful because you do find sometimes it just happens naturally, right? So you think about like giving a gift on Mother's Day, buying a gift for a family member. I mean,
Hmm.
that's an act of generosity, right? Is buying,
Yeah.
right? So that feels a certain way to us when that happens. So then there are some other times that generosity is really exciting and very natural, and you have to remind yourself to do it. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? And
Hmm.
the ideas of the gifts that come, and you start even thinking about, well, I can't wait to give this to that person and see their expression.
Right.
So you just think about the big contrast we have. Well, and then there's the right? The middle school band member that shows up at the door on Sunday afternoon, 3 o'clock, right? So
Yeah.
selling Christmas wrap. It's like,
Yeah.
shh, shh, don't get
Yeah.
the door.
Yeah.
You
Don't get the door. We're not home. So true. So true. But I do think that there's I think all of us do have it within us to be generous.
Right.
And I think we have to recognize that. I'm reminded of Genesis 1, where God says that we were made in his image. And
Hmm.
if there's anything that God is, he's generous, right? He's a
Right.
giver. He is given to the greatest degree that anyone can. So because he's generous and we were made in his image, then there's got to be that DNA transfer for us. But yet something gets in the way of that, right? I mean, I'm not always, like I said, I don't wake up every morning thinking, how can I be generous today? And I am the person that doesn't answer the door sometimes when somebody's at the
Right.
door wanting something, just being honest.
Right.
Um, so what do you think? How do you see that both in your life, but also, I mean, you do this for a living. You try to connect with pastors and spiritual leaders and help them understand generosity at a level that maybe they haven't even considered. So how do you see what's getting in the way of us acting as we were designed to act?
Yeah. So it's fun that you mentioned Genesis and we start there,
Hmm.
because you don't have to travel very far to after the verse that you just mentioned where it
Yeah.
says, God's, we're creating God's image,
Yeah.
that you have the very first family.
Yeah.
And the very first story in the Bible about the very first family is an act of generosity,
Yeah.
right? It's the Cain and Abel giving story.
Yeah. Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, you don't travel, and most pastors don't. You just roll right past it. Most
Right.
Christians roll right past that, right? Whenever we read that, we don't think that. So if you unpack that just a little bit, it does get exciting because one of the brothers got it right, but as you mentioned, one of them didn't get it right.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried, I'm thankful. I'm sorry for the choices Cain made. But when you look at God's interaction with Cain, God comes to Cain and he says, Cain, why is your face downcast?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So Cain didn't feel great about his failed giving moment, but
Yeah.
God didn't reject Cain. God did reject his offering, which is a whole nother ball of wax
Yes.
that says we can actually give and it not be acceptable to God.
Mm-hmm.
And we
Yeah.
know what they gave, I mean, so there's a whole lot in there. But then God says to Cain, he said, if you would have done what is right,
Mm-hmm.
your gift would have been accepted.
Yeah.
So there's a whole implication there that we do know how to live generously. Cain did know what he was supposed to give.
Right.
He made a choice not to do that. God offered grace, but Cain didn't choose that. So
Mm-hmm.
to me, to me, it's a grace-filled story. I'm so
Yeah.
sorry for the choices Cain made, but
Yeah.
when I can say, you know what, I don't always get giving right.
Yeah.
I don't.
True.
But a big part of giving is listening to God.
Yeah.
So even you go back to that why, you listen your story about being generous with your wife. Well, part of that is you got to be alert and sensitive. So I mean, failing to listen and failing to be sensitive is directly proportionate to your ability to be generous.
Yeah, it comes down to obviously either choosing to be selfish or choosing to be others focused. And I mean, yes, we are to take care of ourselves, but when we become, the God we serve, then everything else kind of falls apart from there. So I love that story because I see the same thing you do, which is that God is not, he's disappointed in the action, but he's trying to help him see that it was the condition of his heart that needed to be
Right.
addressed. And so I think that's important for us to kind of just camp on for a moment and really talk about, how do we maintain a generous spirit when we live in a physical world, we have physical needs, um, we have limited resources and limited time. So it
Right.
always feels like there's scarcity, especially in the season we're in today. There's so much scarcity perception that, oh, we're not going to make it. The economy's come to a screeching halt. It's going to take forever to ramp back up. We're doomed. So it's so easy to become selfish and hoard, or at least to preserve, right? Because you're trying to
Yep.
not die, so to speak. And so, how do we push through that? Because that's not who we're created to be. Cain had a
Hmm.
choice. We have a choice. What do you do? How do you communicate? What do you personally do? But how do you also communicate that as you're trying to train others to stay in a generous spirit, to keep that to the forefront rather than allowing other things to influence it and make it diminish in your life?
Yes, I'd say the two most helpful things to me personally, which are also the things that I encourage pastors on.
Mm,
One's spiritual, one's practical.
okay.
On the spiritual side of things, um, the discipline of prayer and fasting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right now, there's two passages in the Bible, Isaiah 58, I think it is, and then Matthew 6, that links prayer, fasting, and giving together.
Right.
And we don't. And so when you fast, it does help break chains and powers that kind of get on you in the world, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And greed is one of those. Worry, fear, anxiety, all those things are tied to our resources, right? Fear of the
Yes.
future, your self-esteem. I mean, you're just taking in stuff from the world all day long. And I found personally that if I don't have a repetition of praying and fasting in my life,
Mm-hmm.
that stuff just gets on me. And because I know that fasting is tied to generosity, and it's the whole being alert and sensitive to God's voice and movement, which we just kind of unpacked a little bit,
Yeah.
there's a whole lot that helps me in that. Then the other side is very practical. And that is when every year my wife and I recreate our family budget from the previous year. We don't call it a budget anymore. It's our spending investment plan, right?
Yes.
That's what we
There
do
you go.
every single year.
Love it.
And there's a line in there. That's our generosity line.
Yes.
And it's not our tithe, right? That's a different line. But we have a
Right.
generosity line, and it's margin for us.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
like you asked, how do I keep that, generous spirit maintained? It's that actually know every month we have pre-decided in advance to give money away,
Yes.
right? So
That's
it's
good.
sitting there and it's
Yeah.
staring at me.
Yeah.
You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? So it's got to go somewhere. I can't spend it on myself.
That's good. I love that because you are being intentional to keep your heart from, you know, taking it on. I was talking to Steve Carter last week, and we were talking about greed and how that can easily take over. And it's the idea that when you're not living on purpose, when you're not living in a way that creates that margin, and you have no way of knowing what you need the next time because you haven't planned it. So when your income goes up, your lifestyle keeps up with it. And I think it's really important for us, especially when we are given more than enough. I mean, we live in a society where we have our needs met and then so much more. So it doesn't matter. I don't want to focus on a percentage because that's not really the point. The point is that it's a conversation that I have with God, and He'll tell me what percentage or what amount I need to set aside. But you guys have done that. My wife and I have done that years ago. Same thing. We tithe regularly. That's something that we just believe in. It's a form of obedience, but we don't stop there. That's just something we do to support our local church that we're part of. But then beyond that, it's a conscious decision to say, I know that I need to do this for my own good. One, I know it makes me fulfilled when I give. Especially, and I don't always get it right. I know, I
Right.
know I've made mistakes with this, but when I make it a goal to give, I know that it makes me more reliant on God. It makes me more outward focused. I experience more joy because it's not just about me, 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 but it allows me actually to exercise the very thing that God has put inside of me, which is to be generous.
Right. And so, I mean, oftentimes we don't connect it, but like pace of life
Mm,
affects generosity. Because when you're on a big pace of life, your mind is always distracted with other things, and you're
yes.
always consumed with whatever's next, or you're thinking about last. And so, me just regularly exercising and putting pace in my life so I can slow down. Because once again, if generosity is built on us having to be sensitive in moments to people around us and to
Mm-hmm.
opportunities around us, when your pace is up there, your alertness is way down,
Yeah.
right? And so even the subconscious discipline of saying I'm going to go exercise so I can slow my mind down is also telling me one of the reasons I'm slowing my mind down is so I can be more prepared to be generous, right? So if you have to write generosity on your calendar, you're too busy to do it. Somehow, as you're saying, you have to make it a part of who you are, or else
Yeah.
it just won't happen.
Yeah. It's not a, yeah. And I guess that's a revelation that I got is that I don't have the spiritual gift of giving. I like giving and I enjoy, when God has challenged me to give and I've seen both spiritual growth and more faith and trust in God. So the benefit, I've definitely experienced the benefit. So for that reason, I'm convinced that it's something I need to do. But it's not something that I think about all the time. So I have to build it in. Otherwise, I'll forget it, or
Right.
I'll choose to do something else.
That's
So
right.
I think so crucial to understand that generosity requires intentionality. You have to think about how to do it. And you mentioned that when you were talking about like a gift giving, right? When you give a
Hmm.
gift, the more important that gift is, the more time you take to
Right.
consider what it needs to be. You might do a bunch of research. You might set it up just the right way so that it has the effect you want it to have. And I think thinking about giving, that way just changes the way we approach it. It's not as like,
Hmm.
okay, I'll carve out $300 a month and find a way to give. No, I
Right.
mean, it's about investing in, and it takes me back to Luke 16, where Jesus is talking about the unjust steward. And then he tells the disciples, therefore use unrighteous mammon to win for yourselves friends. And so it's this idea that I'm actually going to use the things that I have in order to impact lives for eternity, because that will actually come back to me. And I don't do it for that reason most of the time, but I recognize that there's an exchange that's happening, and I think it's important to be intentional. And I think you definitely
Well,
show
and
show that really well.
yeah, and you go back to your word passion, right? So you think about that little illustration of gift giving. So
Mm,
we all give gifts during the year, and some of them we don't put a whole lot of thought into, right? I mean, it's a $10 gift card from Starbucks because we had to, we were invited to a party, whatever.
right.
But then, oh, it's the 25th anniversary with my spouse, right? So
Mm,
even that level of the passion
right.
for the individual really helps, raise the quality of the investment, too. So it just goes back to, we do channel generosity more naturally when it's love focused. And
Hmm.
so how do you
Hmm.
maintain that generous spirit? Really, it's about falling more in love with Christ,
Yeah.
right? Because it's that love that becomes unstoppable in us, that makes us generous all day long, even when we don't realize that's what we're doing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. That's really good. So we got a couple more minutes. I just want to dive into one question. This may take longer than that, but and we'll try to make it a little bit less. But so here's a question: how do we ensure? Because if we have a desire to give, and we even take the step to actually prepare to give, how do we ensure we're making the right decision when it comes to giving? Because sometimes the need is so vast. There's so much need out there, at least perceived, that we want to do the right thing, but we don't know what the right thing is sometimes. So how do you do it personally, but how do you guide other pastors to consider when they should give and how they should give? What's the process that you use?
Yeah, so there's two sides to that, right? Because the needs are so big, you can look back and say, "Well, I'm motivated by that need, but my little gifts isn't going to solve anybody's problem,"
Yeah.
right? So then you choose not to give,
Right.
right? But we got to jump in there and play our part, even
Mhm.
though our gift might seem small. If we're trying to solve cancer,
Right.
right?
Right.
I mean, you have to jump in and just trust the Lord
That's good.
with that little gift, and I've been in the situation where, I gave and I felt it was so small and I was embarrassed. But
Mm.
then when I heard the outcome of what everybody's gifted, it was like, wow, I got to be part of a winning team. And
Yeah.
my faith increased because that told me God had spoken to everybody else. And all I
Hmm.
had to do is be responsible to me. Then the other side of that is, well, sometimes you're put in generous situations and you think, if I give, are they going to really do the right thing with it? See,
Yeah.
that's the other, that's the other side you're thinking.
Yeah.
And so, I tend to be more gracious in those areas, right? Because we all make mistakes. I'm not going to get the giving thing right. It's not my job to make sure that the other person does the right thing.
Mm.
So I try to be more gracious, which sounds funny, right? When you're being generous, I try to be more gracious and not control the outcome of the gift, but just
Yeah.
give the gift and let God take care of the outcome of the
Yeah.
gift.
That's good. I mean, it is. If you're being generous and you're giving, it shouldn't be with a sense of control. I know
Hmm.
that sometimes you want to make sure that, like, for instance, if you're pulling up to a stoplight and somebody comes and wants to,
Right.
is asking you for money, are they going to use it for food? Are they going to use it for drugs?
Right.
It's an unknown sometimes, and you have to kind of think through that or pray through that.
Right.
But I think it's important to look at giving, and I think sometimes I run across this. I've run across this when I was a pastor, where people's objection to giving, to tithing, was that the church didn't do the things they wanted them to do.
Hmm.
And I understand the concern. And my challenge to them was, look, if you don't trust your leadership and what they're doing with their funds, you
Right.
probably shouldn't be at that church. I mean,
That's
forget
right.
about the giving. You go find a church
Right.
that you actually trust
Right.
the leadership.
Right.
So it's a bigger issue than giving. But if you're there and you trust the leadership and you trust the spiritual direction, you have to let go of it. Whether that's a tithe or whether that's an extra gift, controlling it beyond that, I just don't think that 9 times out of 10, that's something that we're supposed to do. Again, you're doing it in faith, not knowing the outcome, right? And you're not solving the world's problems. None of us were created to solve the world's problems.
That's right.
That was not our task. And whether we get $5 or 5 million, that's not. It's still a portion of, can God do it on his own? Yes, he can, but he chooses to use us. And I think that's keeping that in mind is really important. And then just like you said, I think it's just taking the initiative to say, God, I don't know if it's the perfect thing, but I feel led to give in this direction. And I think sometimes the Holy Spirit will actually tell you, don't do that. I mean, if you're
Right.
truly wanting to be a good giver, then you have to talk to God
Right.
a lot. Like you said, you have to pray and fast and make sure that this is not something that's coming out of your own head or out of your own heart, that it is being led by the Holy Spirit. And I think God will protect you from making most mistakes if you approach it that way. But sometimes you don't know. Sometimes God says, "What are you going to do? Are you going to
Yeah.
trust me, or are you just going to revert to your old self?" And that's a
Yeah.
challenge in itself because it does allow us to either grow or not. So
Yeah. It feels like a really tiny sin if I overgive, though.
that's
I know, I know, I know. There's not categories of these things, but
that's
if I'm going to fall on the side, I'm falling on the overgive side, not
That's
the
right.
undergive
That's right.
side.
I think you're definitely safer to do that. I agree with you there. Well, I so enjoyed this conversation. I hope our listeners have as well. Thank you, Todd. Thank you for what you do. I appreciate your heart, man. You are just an incredible guy who just loves to help people to really get this because it's such a crucial, central part to who we are as Christians and as followers of Christ. So I so appreciate your heart for educating and teaching and ministering to pastors, especially spiritual leaders, with this topic because it's so, so needed. So thank you. Thank you for joining me today as well.
Thank you. It's a lot of fun.
All right. And I want to thank you guys for joining us for these 20 or so minutes. And we appreciate you. Hope that you join us next week. Until then, be safe and thank you. Have a good day.